Hello, I'm Mike Naziri, and with me I have a powerlifting psychologist.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
And you are a doctor, correct?
Yeah, I'm a PhD in psychology. I'm a psychotherapist in Colorado, as well as an academic psychologist. So I teach psychology, everything from the freshman level to the doctorate level.
Okay. When and how did you get into powerlifting?
Wow, I think my first weightlifting experience, and you hear this with so many people, I think, is I was watching stuff on television at about 7, 8 years old, and when I was about 7 and 8 years old, Lou Ferrigno was the Hulk, and Arnold was in his heyday, and so I think I really got interested in lifting weights more through bodybuilding than anything else. But there was a powerlifting competition on television somewhere along that line. That was the first time I'd ever seen a deadlift. And I thought it was kind of a weird lift because, growing up, I'd watched the Olympics and seen the Olympic lifts, and they're so elaborate and there's so much range of motion and everything, that I thought the deadlift was kind of interesting, just to pick something up from the ground to your waist. But the amount of weight they were doing, as I recall, was just unreal to me at the time. And I thought, wow, that's just really cool. I didn't really get into act. So I weightlifted through high school, had strength training classes and things like that. My football coach in high school was different than a lot of the day. A lot of them in the day thought that lifting weights would make you slower. And my football coach, and he was our PE teacher, was a lot more progressive than that for his time. So we started doing squats and bench presses. We never learned deadlifts, but we did have a room full of power racks and a room full of free weights. Did that through high school, got a gym membership. So I was going to a commercial gym at the time, and reading bodybuilder magazines. That was really what there was. I didn't come across Powerlifting USA until a number of years later, when I was working as an adult. One of the things that got me into powerlifting was I went to a police psychology conference, and there was a psychologist from Southern California named Dr. Blum, and he actually was the inspiration for me to become a psychologist as well as a powerlifter. He talked about how powerlifting was so important for your strength through your hips and through your legs, that it was important to be able to defend yourself on the street. But also the psychological benefits of working out were some of the things he talked about, the stress relief of it. So that was, when I kind of went back to the gym, so to speak, after a couple of years of not really doing much. And I met a guy that was a competitive powerlifter, and that was really what changed everything for me.
Well, it's that's very interesting that you ran into this police officer. I'm a retired police officer,
Oh, cool.
and I was forced out because of diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's just interesting. And well,
Yeah, I started as a police officer when I was 21 years old in 1989. And it was about 1996 I actually transferred into our fire department and finished my 22 years as a firefighter, and got up into administration and that kind of thing. But that was when I started going to school, and I really fell in love with psychology, and I just decided maybe I could give back a little bit by becoming a psychologist. From having the professional background I did a lot of papers, and my research is on police officers and firefighters.
what organization do you lift in?
Um, Today I'm lifting in the USPA. I'm interested in going back to lift in the WABDL. That's where I started. I was living in Utah at the time, and WABDL's pretty big in Utah. Gus Rethwich, I think I even had one of my colleagues tell me that Gus lives in Utah now. I don't know if that's true. I know he's from Oregon. But we had wobble meets, so it was push pull was the first powerlifting meets I got into, and then it was the USPF that I was lifting in back in the early 2000s. And about the time I went to graduate school was about the time I stopped competing. It was about 2004 I stopped competing. And now I don't hear anything of the USPF in Utah, but the USPA is there, and so is APF. So I'm a member of the APF as well, and have competed. It's been a year or so since I've been APF, but I really like that organization as well.
How do you lift? With equipped or?
I'm a single ply lifter. When I was competing back in early 2000s, there was multiply, there was single ply. Raw wasn't even really a thing. Raw was something that was kind of emerging, and people talked about it a little bit about, wanting to do that. But back when I started, I mean, I was lifting. Bench press was a super heavy duty blast shirt from Inzer. You could get maybe 30 pounds out of it. The Titan Fury came out, and I remember some of my partners would get about 100 pounds out of that. But I did a double denim shirt for a period of time, and it was really difficult. Highly technical. Didn't do really well with it in competition, but in training I could do it. But it just competition, it was a bomber for me. So I've just stayed with single ply. Even now that I'm older, I find that single ply helps me to handle the weights that I want to use without really banging up my joints so much.
It seems to be like the reasonable in between, to getting a little over crazy with the canvas stuff and everything. I don't know. Does the organizations out there in Utah, you guys do have a strict girl event?
Haven't seen any. I mean, I imagine some of the strongman competitions may do that. I haven't dabbled too much in strongman. I know a couple of people out there that have done those kind of events, and I follow them on Instagram, but I haven't actually competed at anything like that.
On the East Coast, like a lot of the organizations have the strict girl now. Yeah, it's like they usually do it like like if you have like a full power meet, they'll have like the night before they'll do like the strict girl.
I think it's interesting. I've seen strict curl things here and there in the magazines over the years. Every once in a while, there would be either something in the bodybuilder magazine, or of course the old Powerlifting USA might cover something like that. And I think it's interesting.
It's a lot.
I hope they resurrect some things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to do the night before the meet, and it like you wind up as a powerlifter. I guess sometimes a lot of people I hear they're not like focusing as much on their biceps as they want to.
Sure.
But most guys, every guy wants big biceps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now it's like it becomes like a thing, like an event that you're training for. So I like it. Are you currently training right now?
I'm currently training, working with a powerlifting coach to work with my Evil Twin bench shirt. That's a lot of shirt for me. The other thing is that within the last couple of years, it was 3 years ago, I was riding a bicycle, and I had a motorist open their car door into the bike lane, and I hit the door and broke my collarbone. So that took me about a year to get back, and I was really excited. I was thinking I was going to lift in some meets, and that actually, I was going back and I was signed up for a Wabdo meet, and that accident happened actually 30 days before the meet. So I mean, my numbers were up. I was feeling great. My gear was fitting great. My body weight, I just felt like I really had everything under control. And as soon as that car door opened and I knew that I wasn't going to evade that crash, it all kind of crumbled.
Well, things like that, like they're just part of the sport, like life, like affects, the training for powerlifting, like just whether, you have a job that your days rotate, you know, like first I had my days would rotate for so long. I would work 4 to 12s, you know, it was
Mhm.
tough to train. So like a lot of times I was discouraged and I didn't train, or, you know, now that I look back on it, I think also I was also, I would like fall into like bouts of like depression, and I would
Yes.
stop lifting, and it probably would have been better if I kept lifting, I think. But
I think the world today with YouTube and some of the podcasts, especially a lot of those power lifters that were really the champions of the time when I was kind of learning or competing. You know, I was always competing like at a state level, local level. So the biggest meet I ever did was the Wabdo Worlds when it was in Reno, and I think that was 2003. What a cool event! Met Ryan Kennelly there. What a great guy. But what you see on Instagram with everybody kind of posting their victories, you know, their gym victories and all that kind of stuff. It was even more amplified in Powerlifting USA. I mean, that was the thing that you watched for. And there was another magazine. It was pretty new, and I'm trying to think what it was connected to, but there was another magazine at the time. So there were a couple of powerlifting magazines. And then, of course, this is really kind of funny because I didn't even really use the internet until about 96. So, you know, I had friends in the fire department and stuff that were on the internet. I didn't even know what they were talking about. Computers scared me to death. My brother did computers in high school, and it was all that binary code and DOS and everything. And I'm like, nah, forget about it. That's, you know, but you really only got bits and pieces. It's like if you were even going to try and piece together all of the stuff that Louis Simmons had to teach you, one article at a time out of Powerlifting USA or something that was on the internet, it was just really impossible to see what that would look like in real life. And so you got kind of this perfect world version of that, mixed with stories of being insanely intense and doing all sorts of crazy, you know, kind of crazy risky things. And I think now having a lot of those people online talking about bombing out of meets, and how a lot of them, I never even thought of this back when I was competing, but how a lot of them would have like a suit that they wore for their opener, and then a suit that they'd have for their second, and then maybe they had one that was really tight to try and, you know, set a record or something. I never thought about, I had one shirt and one suit and one pair of knee wraps. It was that kind of a thing. And I think now you're starting to see too, even the stories about when somebody had a pretty major injury and had to come back from it. And in sports psychology, even injury recovery and coming back from an injury is a huge, huge thing for powerlifters. I was bench pressing in FitCon 2 years ago after the bike accident. It was a year after the bike accident, single ply shirt, and I hit a 391, and I mean, it just popped off my chest. And I was so excited because I really wanted to get that over 400, you know, and I got ahead in my head so that when I went out on the platform, it popped off my chest. In my head, I had it done and locked out, but I really didn't. And I dislocated my right shoulder and couldn't even take a third attempt. So this was one of those kind of situations like you're talking about, where now all of a sudden I was like, what do I do? Well, if I hadn't had people like Dave Tate talking about starting all over with a broomstick, or Louis Simmons talking about, you know, the injuries that he had and how he came back, I would have never had the mindset. And also, having studied a lot of sports psychology, had the mindset to say, okay, your training goals need to change. Now you're not looking at PRs. Now it's PRs with a broomstick, and it's painless reps with the bar rather than anything even on the bar. And that really changed my perspective and has helped keep me a little bit out of those, you know, those low points that
yeah,
you get to when you get challenged.
I think it's got to be tough when you get to a certain age. I would say probably, from when I've talked to people around 50s, mid 50s, where it's like, you know, you're not going to be hitting PRs anymore. You know, like it's just like a battle of hope, just holding on to what you have and not sliding too far. I can only imagine that's got to be a tough one for people to face.
See, and I think we're a lot of it too, you'll have different people online selling their scientific approach, and these guys are the guys that have PhDs in sports physiology or whatever, and they're like, this is the scientific approach. And then you have other people preaching, this is a very practical approach. I've been doing this forever, and you have, everybody always has kind of their angle. And one thing, as a scientist myself, I look at is a lot of the research that came out about what happens to the human body after 40 for men, and all these declines in testosterone and stuff are based on samples of sedentary guys. These guys are the guys that are surfing the couch and not active. And now my generation, so I'm 52, and my generation is like one of the first generations where we really got it drummed into us, not only in the police academy and fire academy, but elsewhere, that fitness was a lifestyle thing. This was.
You went to a better police academy than me, but the NYPD, they just was.
I actually got an opportunity. I was visiting a pal of mine that was a sergeant for NYPD, and he got me into the old police academy building the last year that it was open.
One in Brooklyn or the one in Manhattan?
In Manhattan.
There's an older one in Brooklyn.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, so a colleague of mine set me up with her dad. She was somebody I went to grad school with. It's Rabbi Cass, that's the chief chaplain for NYPD. I know him, and then his commander, Sergeant Brian Riley's a friend of mine, and so I've gone out there and been able to visit and go to Brian was working at the time out of the 5th precinct. So I got to go and visit there. I got rained on with a good Manhattan rain. That's interesting, but it's a whole different world for me to go to New York from being a born and raised Utah kid. It was something else.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I went to the police academy in 2006. And got out of the academy. Went to, it was called the Impact program. So most people got sent to bad areas, and they flooded the areas with guys on foot posts.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I knew somebody who got me into Times Square. So I was there for 6 months, which was great. And then I went to the 6th precinct, which is the West Village.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a better place to work as a cop. I mean,
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, just it was a great place. It was a lot of fun. And then I made a horrible choice. I had a great time as a cop. It was awesome. And then I took the sergeant's exam. I got promoted. I got sent to the 4-7 precinct in the North Bronx. It was a nightmare.
I don't doubt it. One of the things when I was coming up through, my first promotion was in the fire department. I got promoted to captain, which is the counterpart, to sergeant. And I was fortunate because at least somebody along the line had the conversation with me that when you get promoted, the guys that work for you become your work, and they do the policing. You're not the guy anymore. And I think a lot of times guys get a promotion and they think that they've gone from cop to super cop or firefighter to super firefighter. And actually now you're a supervisor, and you got to figure out, how do I take care of these guys? And,
it's not as fun.
It's not the same job. It's a whole different skill set, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, you have to learn. It was tough, and you just couldn't be friendly the same way you were when you were a cop, the way you were friends with other cops. You couldn't have that same relationship with the other cops anymore. And it was that the first time as a sergeant, like when you walk into a room and everyone gets quiet, like, oh, the sergeant's here, and you're I'm not one of the guys anymore.
Sure. Yeah, and it's so embedded in the culture that it doesn't matter if you try to do things differently than that. It's a very, very running against the grain. But honestly, that's what made me change my college major from fire science and criminal justice into psychology, because I was thinking, it's kind of, and I had a chief that had a frank conversation with me. He says, why do you want to go get a degree in a job that you already have? Why don't you get something that will open something up for after you retire? And boy, I tell you, I was glad I had that conversation, because I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I started to kind of understand people a little bit better. It made me more effective as a leader. But by the time I finished my master's, I was so much more in tune with what I hadn't been good at. As a I think I would, even after I had that, I'd have been a better. In fact, I'm still at an active reserve in a small department, and when I go out and work the road, I have a whole different skill set now that I can speak to the public with. It just works better. But no, that was another thing that got me kind of interested in psychology. And then by the time I was working on my dissertation, I was wrapping that up. I hit 22 years, and there was a faculty position open at Utah Valley University, and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of done doing this fire command thing, and it's time for somebody else to do it, and I'm going to move on. So that's what I did.
Uh, what's what's your training method, right? Like, so what I what I mean by that is, well, I guess now like a lot of people are on the West Side system.
Mhm.
Um, Personally, I can't stand Louis Simmons. A lot of everybody loves Louis Simmons. I can't stand the guy. But what how do you train? How many days a week do you train? Do you train in like an eight? Like I train usually in like 8 week cycles. I'll train.
Yeah. I would say that I probably follow West Side in a lot of principles, but I do agree with what has been said both online, in print, and in different podcasts. You're not trained in West Side if you're not at West Side. You can have a conjugate kind of system. I do that. I do speed work. I do max effort work. I do use what he calls the repetition method, which is basically bodybuilding, where if I have, there comes a point to where, that South Pole, North Pole of max effort and dynamic effort seems to need to have some of that middle ground
Yeah.
part to it. The other thing, and I use bands. I really, really like using bands. But Ryan Kennelly said in his Bench Monster TV just a few weeks ago, that you got to lay off the band sometimes, because sometimes you just feel your joints getting beat up, and that's been my experience.
Yeah. I like to use bands and chains,
Mhm.
and yeah, I could see it's a lot because I mean, what you're lifting at the top of the bench or the squat, I mean, it's 100 pounds over what you could have done on a regular squat, basically. So it takes its toll on you.
Sure. I think one of the other persons that really, people that really has affected me, and always has since the the Powerlifting USA days. I really like what J.M. Blakely has to share. And again, he's one that's not an advocate of speed work. It works for me. I don't know that I really do it great. I've just kind of taken some weight off of my speed days, and it seems like I'm getting a lot better of a push and a lot better out of the hole and stuff. But J.M. Blakely has, the way that he said that he would train his bench press is kind of move up and then do 3 heavy singles. Dave Tate has talked about how you're a lot less likely to get injured on a single than you are like on a double or a triple. And I found that to be useful.
That's that's interesting. I never really thought about that. I guess when you, I mean, when you read about tendonitis, uh, they always say it's repetition of movement.
Sure.
I guess could one single movement cause tendonitis? I don't know. I don't think so. But if you're just always at that single rep range, you're always training at like 99%. I mean, it's rough on your body. It's rough. It's rough mentally too.
Sure.
Because
Sure.
even if you don't hurt anything physically, it's hard mentally.
And I think that that's where, I, again, trying to piece conjugate system together from Powerlifting USA years ago just was different. I mean, I think, I don't know if this is fair, but just like from my own position and listening to a lot of West Side podcasts and Elite FTS podcasts. I mean, I listen to a lot of things and try and learn, and it seems like max effort and beating your record that Louis talks about. He's now talking more about training optimally than training maximally.
Oh, he's getting old.
That was not clear. That was really not clear in the 2000s. And of course they had Chuck, and Chuck was setting all these records, and he was on Powerlifting USA about every other month, this kind of thing. So they were just so big, but you just couldn't piece it together. I found that maximal effort for me means whatever my maximal effort is for that day, regardless of the number.
Yeah.
And that's been helpful, because realistically to go into the gym and to feel flat, like maybe you're just not as hydrated, or maybe you didn't sleep as well. And I train in the morning, so if I don't sleep well, I've been surprised. I've had sleepless nights turn into really, really great days in the gym, and I've had them to where I almost feel like it was a waste of time to go to the gym. And that's where I think the mental work comes in. I think you need to have a good self-talk. And this is kind of too taking your own advice, right? If you have a partner that doesn't do so well one day, but really just lays it out there and gives it the all, the conversation you would have with that person is, yeah, you didn't feel real good today, but you really pushed yourself. I mean, you got there. But when it comes to yourself, it's really hard to have those conciliatory kind of conversations. So I really look at, did I train maximally? I hate to say it, I'm a grade grubber and a numbers hound, just like anybody else. I want to see that 5 more pounds on every lift all the time. But at 52 years old now, I'm lifting heavier than I was in my 30s. And so I'm a lot bigger person too, but I'm not willing to give up on the age thing at this point.
Yeah, you're bigger now. That's a key, because you have to. You can't be making gains unless you're gaining. I feel like if you're putting, in order to be pushing more weight, you need more muscle.
Sure.
That's more weight. Like,
sure.
You can't stick around at the same exact body weight forever. I think.
Right.
I mean, like, you can, I think, optimally like train the muscle that you have. Like, you take a new lifter, you take any person that doesn't lift and just make them squat a ton more.
Yeah.
With the same muscle that they have. I mean, that's easy. But
sure.
then after that, first couple months, now it's gonna get hard.
I think the second thing that I've really gotten from the West Side system is trying to look at my weaknesses and do them for higher reps, and really be concerned more about kind of that sort of thing. So like even for triceps, I've been doing a lot more of the high rep band work with the push downs and things to get blood flow. Mobility's become a lot more important for me at my age than it was before. But I think too, and here's a real side of lifting that I think is important, and that is that I think powerlifting, I don't have a lot of experience with any kind of Olympic lifting, particularly competitive. It just was not available. But I think powerlifting is really can be, and maybe strongman too, can be a self journey to kind of really, it's kind of a way of getting to know yourself in kind of a real material way. But there's so much of it, like you're talking about, if you have a bad day lifting in the gym, or you have a bad meet or anything, and it kind of throws you down in that valley a little bit, it's an awesome opportunity to learn about how you kind of do that. How do you kind of come back from a setback?
Yeah. Well, with Olympic lifting, I think is different than powerlifting in the way that an average person who's not like a gifted athlete cannot have that journey in Olympic lifting, because they will go nowhere. Because if you don't have like just natural, if you're just naturally fast, if you're just not naturally fast, if you don't have just natural balance. If you're not an all around athlete, that sport is not for you. I mean, it's just I've talked with a lot of Olympic lifters, and you really have to be an athlete to do it. Like powerlifting, you can take anyone. Anyone. My wife trains a woman with cerebral palsy, who's I mean I had to make special shoes for her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I, you know, she like, but we can have her powerlift. She can't do Olympic lifting.
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
I think the sport of powerlifting I think is great. I like sports where it's just you. I mean, this is just me. I'm not a team athlete guy. I just my personal preference. I like sports like this. But I mean, we did compete as a team. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in college, that's how I started. That's how I met my wife on the
Mm-hmm.
powerlifting team. And but you're a team. You're rooting for each other, and that's nice. But really, in your head, it's you beating yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and you do as you listen to different podcasts and things like that. I think you do. I think that there is a set of goals. There's both terminal goals and formative goals for everybody that are going to be a little bit different. And that's primarily too why I think if your goals are really different, like if you're a raw lifter and your goals are really just kind of that sort of primal, I want to know what my body can do without any support. I want to know that. Those are some good goals, but it makes it sometimes hard to understand what kind of lifting guys like Dave Hoff really do, where it's a 3,000 total, but I mean, I can tell you even from just single ply lifting for me that to get under a bar that is a huge amount of weight, and to trust, not, you have to be in that perfect groove. It's so much more technical. I can miss a lift raw and I'll still be in the neighborhood of my max. But if you miss a lift with a shirt, I've dropped a bar on my throat before, because my spotter, and this was many years ago, but it was with a spotter that wasn't ready for that get out of the groove dump that a shirt will do.
Yeah, I've lately been saying that one day I want to try and go train with a polyester suit one day, because we started I started lifting back in 2001 in college.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our coach, he started lifting in 1976, and like you said, back then there was no raw. There was you just everything was polyester, just a polyester suit, and
And you were welcome to lift raw. I mean, nobody judged you if you showed up in a singlet,
well, I don't think anyone did. I think you
but you just couldn't compete.
crazy if you did. Well, here's what happened. So we had a team of about 30 people. We had a lot of kids that wanted to lift, and most of them, like myself, weren't very strong. And but a lot of these kids didn't have money to buy the equipment. They didn't have money even to buy a belt. You know what I mean? We were sharing belts with like 30 people. So it just so happened that this guy Al Siegel, he started an organization, the Anti-Drug Athletes United. It was mostly in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
So we wound up going out there just because that's how we wound up in Raw, because with a bunch of kids with no money, and and so that's how I've just competed like that for so long, like till now still, so yeah, I hear a lot of like equipped lifters when they hear like you lift raw, they automatically they think that like you like hate them, But like I got no beef with people that lift with different suits and stuff. I got a beef with I do have a beef with steroids. That's I got a beef with.
There's I mean, and it's I look at it from the perspective, as long as the rules are followed and everybody's trying to do the right thing, that's a good thing. For me, again, luckily I've listened to some podcasts where you have one of your heroes from days back say, oh yeah, I had several different suits and I would do this. Well, in the last 6 years, maybe I've been everywhere from 215 to 283. And so when you're doing that, you got to have some different suits because, like when I get into my largest suit at above 275, it's as tight as my second suit is when I get into it at around 250.
Yeah.
If I cram myself at 280 in the 250 suit, boy, it gets tricky. It throws your leverages off, and you really have to practice with it to get any pop out of it.
I got to start interviewing smaller people. I don't like, everybody I interview is making me look really small.
And I was not a healthy 283 by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that's another part that you're getting on the internet that you would have never gotten the magazines back when I was coming up is realistically, these guys that have set a lot of world records, especially at the super heavyweight. I think AJ on the West Side movie is really good to say, yeah, I had sleep apnea and I was waking up choking and I thought I was going to die. And then Louis goes, you could put 50 more pounds on. These are the kind of stories that I think are really helpful to put recreational lifters like me, put things in perspective a little bit, especially like you talk about the cost of gear. You really have to go on and to be real honest with you, when I started lifting in gear back in the early 2000s, I was buying mostly used things off the internet, off of eBay. eBay was the big thing right then. And you could try stuff out that way. Somebody would get a shirt and say, yeah, I got this shirt and I can't even get it on. I got it too. Because, you go to the gear websites and they say, okay, if you want the regular fit for your size, it's this size. But if you want the tight fit or the competition fit was always like seriously like way too small. It was hard to get into that stuff unless you really had a crew and everything. And that's another thing is oftentimes if you go into a powerlifting meet by yourself with your gym bag, especially if you're an out of town guy, you don't have a handler and you're trying to lift gear, it's really a big challenge. It's an absolutely huge challenge to wrap your own knees and all that. But that's a cool thing about powerlifting world that I've never seen in any other sport that I've competed in is powerlifting. You can ask a total stranger in the warm-up room, will you wrap my knees? And they'll do it.
That's you brought it up earlier too. We were at a competition and you met someone that was pretty famous and he was nice to you. And I find that in powerlifting, there's a lot of nice people. You would think that powerlifting, all these guys must have crazy egos. They just must not be nice people. I don't find that at all.
I think it's there was a period of time when it seemed like, at least in the media side of powerlifting, that there was maybe bad blood against some of the top bench pressers, and there was that. I don't dig that very much. But what I can tell you is, like, I'll give you a great example. I was in the warm-up room for FitCon a couple of years ago when I dislocated my shoulder, and I've got this bench shirt I got to put on and everything. And so I get it on okay, and I'm trying to get it fitted, and I'm trying to do this all myself. And I look over and I see a familiar face, and all I remember was the name Bill in my head. And I looked at the guy, he's a big guy, and I said, "Are you Bill?" And he smiled and he said, "Yes, it was Bill Gillespie." And I said, "Wow, it's really cool to meet you and stuff. I haven't seen, anything about you since I used to read the magazine and stuff." Anyway, long story short, his son was the person that warmed me up for my, 393 bench that I did in that meet. And, I wish I'd had my head in the game and gone over 4, but nice people. I mean, just seriously. And then I think he went on to bench 8 something that day in 60 years old, So I find powerlifting overall is just a really, really great community. We have a lot of different federations and stuff like that, which I think is kind of interesting. But it seems like if you're a powerlifter, people, when at least at the meets anyway, that everybody's very supportive, co-supportive.
Yeah, that's what I find. Well, I know you're a scientist. you're a psychologist. Do you have a faith that helps you get through life's hardest moments?
Yeah, I'm kind of an interesting when you talk about faith wise, because coming from Utah, I was raised in the predominant religion there from the time I was born. And about my second year of patrol, I had been shot at. And, I mean, there's some things that happen that make you really start taking an inventory about who am I and what do I think happens when somebody dies. These kind of things kind of were, that existential crisis that made me start to kind of do my own journey. Up before that time, I've been a martial artist, and of course I'd read a lot of Bruce Lee growing up because Bruce Lee was the guy. And I think probably most of my introduction to Zen and the Tao Te Ching and stuff like that were things that I got indirectly through Bruce Lee and his writings and things. And then just later in life, I started attending a Lutheran church, and I actually got to the point where I thought, hey, you know what, I could retire and become clergy, and this would be a great job. I got really into it and liked it a lot, so I did a lot of study and theology and stuff, which was really years down the road became a very good blessing for me, because I'd learned a little bit of New Testament Greek. I'd learned a lot about translation and interpretation and things like that. So now, as a professor that guides doctoral research and stuff like that, looking at how interpretation and stuff, that really, it blessed me. There was a lot there. So I'm a confessional Christian. And what I found is that through my life, it seems like there's always been somebody watching out for me. I had a cop friend of mine say, God looks out for cops and fools. And I'm like, well, I'm both of those. So, I feel like a lot of my life's courses have been a mixture of me kind of goofing things up and then God kind of pulling me back into line. And so, yeah, I have a sincere and abiding faith that I think I try to use intellectually, that's complementary to the science side of things. I don't find at all science to be non-compatible with faith. I think it's apples and oranges, and people need to be eating both.
Uh, How'd you wind up getting shot at in Utah? Like, this sounds like the safest state in the country.
You would think so. There was actually a period of time, I think, that Salt Lake City had a higher crime rate than Denver. Um, I worked in the suburbs, and so working starting in the late 80s and going through the 90s. That was when we had a lot of kids that were getting in trouble down in LA. And we had a couple of programs up in Salt Lake that were for kind of delinquent kids. And the California courts started going, do you want to go to prison, or do you want to go to this program in Utah? Well, a lot of these kids were gang affiliated, but they weren't really the hardcore guys. They were kind of little fish in LA. Once they made it to Utah, they were big fish. And so we had, that. And we went to a party, and we were chasing these little gangbangers, and they were taking off from the party, and they went up over this fence, and my partner and I were chasing them. And all of a sudden, pow, this gun went off, and we didn't know which direction or what it came from, but it was big.
Yeah.
And it turned out that, and we were just about to go over the fence. So all the guys went over the fence. We were going to go over that fence until that shot happened on the other side of the fence. And we kind of looked at each other, and we just called for help on the radio and kind of hunkered down to wait for help. And it turned out it was actually an ex-military guy that was the neighbor that was tired of these kids coming into his yard. And he stepped out of his backyard with an M1 and shot into the grass. And it wasn't too far away from us. And I was just like, that could have very easily been anything else. I'm glad it was a good guy with a gun, honestly. I mean, that made the difference. But there was that, and then there was other, entanglements I had with a suspect that tried to stab me, and these kind of things. And you start realizing, hey, I'm in kind of a dangerous situation, and maybe I should get my spiritual house in order,
Yeah. Yeah. I always happen to be not working for when anything horrible happens. Yeah. Seriously. Yeah. When I was in the sixth precinct, I was home. Two cops got killed back in just like 2007. Yeah. When I got promoted, I went to highway patrol. No, I'm sorry. I got promoted. I went to the 4-7 precinct. I was there 2 years. There were lots of shootings there. Thank God no one when I was there got hurt.
Yeah.
Then I got into highway patrol, which was a hard unit to get into, especially for a sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
But I happened to have a good friend who worked at Harley Davidson, and a lot of the superiors there got their motorcycles fixed there. And it was basically, well, if you want your motorcycles fixed, this guy's getting in.
That's always nice to have a connection, huh?
Yeah, I got my way in there. That was great. I got paid to ride a motorcycle around, and it was a good time.
I know a lot of guys that, in fact, one of my best pals was a motor officer, and then he ended up leaving our agency and going to Nevada Highway Patrol, and he was there for the rest of his career. And you know what? I'm not that good of a motorcycle rider. I love them, but I always felt a little bit better having a big piece of machinery around me than.
Oh yeah, it's awfully dangerous. Yeah. Yeah, I escorted President Obama a few times, and I escorted Donald Trump when he was running before he got elected. And,
Wow.
yeah, but I was around for Bush, but I wasn't in highway patrol. I was just on a foot post while he drove by.
I was on a foot post for Bush Senior when he was in Utah. He was going through the University of Utah and had a traffic corner. And then the coolest thing and that was the only time I'd ever seen a presidential motorcade in my life. And then it was back, I was attending a conference for a psychology conference in Chicago. And I got there a day early, like I typically do for conferences. And I went for a walk in the neighborhood, and gosh, there were cops everywhere. But they didn't seem like they were on anything, like they were rushing to do anything, but they were everywhere. I'm like, I've never seen this many cops. And I just kind of walked around. I was looking for a sandwich or whatever. And then all of a sudden they blocked the streets, and in came Obama's motorcade. And that was when Obama was, I think, campaigning for his second term. And there was the presidential motorcade, and he drove past me on the street, and I was like, wow, it's pretty impressive, entourage, really.
Did you see all the guys in the SUVs with the machine guns?
Oh yeah. Like,
they will, anyone that runs up to that thing, they will just tear in half.
Yeah, I've thought about that, that Secret Service job, what that would be like. Of course, there's the Clint Eastwood movie and stuff where he's Secret Service, and they kind of, make it romantic and everything. But boy, what a responsibility.
Well, the uniformed Secret Service is a very boring job.
Yeah.
That's just, they're just doing checkpoints and scanning bags and stuff like that. That's a really awful job. You have to go all over the country, and it's nothing cool. You want to be like a plainclothes Secret Service agent. You want to get into that side of it. But all right, most important question. Forget about religion, psychology. How badly do you hate CrossFit?
I think, and I really have a lot of mixed feelings about CrossFit. I was competing in powerlifting in the fire department when CrossFit started kind of coming out, and there was a captain at one of the close fire departments to mine. We were kind of set up in Salt Lake, very much like maybe LA, where you have a lot of little towns that'll have their own police departments and fire departments and stuff, all the suburbs. And he was just getting into it, and he was kind of telling me about it. And he and his wife were really accomplished as the combat challenge people right before that. So they were going on ESPN and doing the combat challenge, and this fire department had won it with him, and the guy that's now the chief of that fire department was on that winning squad. And so he was telling me about it, but I just thought, yeah, it sounds okay, but it just doesn't sound all that fun to me. And I think, like anything else, once something gets really big and it gets over commercialized, then you start getting some weird stuff that happens in there. And I've heard a lot of critique about CrossFit gyms where maybe they have the guys running it that really don't have that much training and education and even experience. And I suppose that there's people that are very, I have friends that do some CrossFit and they really love it. I think the one thing CrossFit does great is they have this sense of belonging at a gym that I think is just really rare unless you're involved in an iron gym like I'm lifting at now, where we really, you see the same people and you train with the same people and you're all power lifters, most of you anyway. It's a different vibe. And I think that the CrossFit gyms really have their own thing. But to be real honest with you, I think that it also kind of communicates to an outsider that we kind of have our thing. And if you want to come here, you got to kind of do our thing. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's kind of the sense I get.
The best thing about CrossFit for powerlifting is that it's recruited more powerlifters than ever, because people, I guess, maybe they're not intimidated by the CrossFit, and then also they get injured constantly because it's ridiculous, and and then they they're in the gym, they've learned about lifting, that squatting doesn't scare them, deadlifting doesn't scare them. And I've seen just tons of people they've gone from CrossFit to powerlifting. I think that's how the sport has gotten bigger recently, I think, because of it. Because trying to just convince someone to come and just go into like a powerlifting gym is a scary thing at first.
Yeah, and I think CrossFit has lent itself to the rise of raw lifting. I see a lot more people raw lifting than even classic raw lifting with knee wraps, and in my gym, we have mostly people, most of our lifters, and we've got a meet set for June 12th is going to be a USPA meet at
June 13th. So I'll look out for you. And June
13th.
Very
cool.
Yeah, 100% raw. I'll be in.
Yeah, we're doing, and to be honest with you, as I see the registrations coming in, most people are raw. I haven't seen any classic raw that I can remember off the top of my head, and I don't see any geared lifters. So even the meets that I would go to when I would compete, I was one of very few geared lifters that would show up, which again, then you have to reset your goals. Like you were talking about goals before. Well, if I'm going to be the only 52-year-old male lifting single ply there, well, I know that getting the medal at the end of the award ceremony is not the thing, right? Because I just paid for that, but to try and get something like a PR.
Don't throw it out. Don't throw it out, because you know what? If you're the only one that had the balls to go and compete, then you still won. That's the way that's what my coach told us. That's the way I look at it now. My wife is 102 pounds. She's very strong, and no one, just very few times that she has someone to compete against it. But you know what I mean? Like, she still is an amazing lifter. That first place, it still counts.
Sure. And I try and look at where do my numbers kind of line up with different things, trying to keep in mind too that every federation has a little bit different rules and that kind of stuff. But, I'm happy with my numbers. I'm not really happy with my squat right now, but I'm dialing that in. And a lot of that is playing with mobility and some different things. Again, trying to work around and work with injuries that have happened in the past. And that's where I guess, when you bring up CrossFit, that the one thing that I have heard as far as stereotypes of CrossFit is that there is a lot of injuries. I've known people that do CrossFit that have been injured, but then again, I've been injured powerlifting. But the rhabdo thing kind of concerned me. I did a little bit reading up on that. Like there's some sort of badge of honor for blowing a muscle up so that you get all this, and they call it rhabdo. I can't remember what the physiological name is, but it's a very major muscular injury from overuse. And I just think, yeah, if that's kind of the culture there, that's not really training optimal. That's just, but then again, if you reflect back when you were 20, you were willing to do things in your 20s that you're just not willing to do right now.
Yeah, I could wrap my like strongman makes sense to me. Powerlifting makes sense to me. Olympic lifting makes sense to me. I just can't get my head around okay, maybe they want to be a little more functional than the strongman, but it drives me crazy.
Well, my understanding, because when it first came out, my understanding from my fire colleague was that it was actually an adaptation from some military training, from like some special force training, where if you're going to be a Navy SEAL or something like that, a lot of chin-ups and a lot of these different kinds of things is going to do better for you than a multiply bench press of 1,000 pounds, right? Yeah. So that makes sense to me, but I don't think CrossFit is today what it started out being. I don't think it's homogenous. I think that there's a lot of different things going on with it that.
If I was a terrorist and I was behind the door, I would be more scared of someone that could squat 1,000 pounds coming through that door than someone that could do 1,000 pull-ups. That's what I was. All right, so let's get on to your field, psychology, right? I can't stand when people try and motivate people with negative talk. I can't. It drives me crazy. You know what I'm talking about? Like, people will say you're not going to make this, like you can't do it. Like, I don't see how it works. It drives me nuts when people do it.
I think the only, my point for that in motivation, and I guess, is if somebody before they lift taps into some sort of rage that they have, and that's been thrown around. In fact, I was listening to a podcast this morning that talked about certain lifters that just before they go out on the platform get into this internal rage, and they go out there and it works for them. I think what Louis Simmons says about doing that, and Dave Tate echoes this too, is if you do that when you're training, you're burning things up that you shouldn't burn up. And it's not healthy to do that all the time to get yourself psyched up. But for me, motivation dies when it becomes personal. And the unfortunate thing with with the old football coach, you're nothing, and this kind of thing. Those things are personal attacks, and I think that they don't work as well as other kind of motivations. I've seen, other things that they talk about a little bit in the West Side movie is like how they would bet and they would have money in the chalk bowl and stuff. I can see how rivalries and that kind of stuff would be motivating, but I really do think positive motivation as a coach, it works a lot better for me when my coach tells me, hey, no, you can do this, and just tweak this or just tweak that. I'm a lot more motivated. And the other thing that I found with working with my coach is that the more and more he's worked with me like that, the more and more I actually trust his judgment, right? So when he's calling numbers and saying, well, we're going to do this, and I've never bench pressed that much before, haven't in a real long time, and now I'm going to do it. You got to be able to trust the people that you train with, and I don't find this to be very productive typically.
What's your biggest weakness?
Honestly, being an introvert and being a psychologist I've gotten in my own head too much sometimes. Like I said, at that missed lift in FitCon, I got ahead of myself. I'd completed the lift emotionally and mentally before I actually physically did, and that cost me. The worst thing that I do, and I'm really, really working on, is when you unrack that weight and the first thing through your mind is, shit, that's heavy. that is just, and every time
Yeah,
I do that,
you gotta take a heavier weight out and get used to it, or just do lockouts with heavier weight.
yeah, but I do operate a lot on sound bites and things that I've heard, and actually, things like one of mine for that, particularly in the squat, is one from Dave Tate that he says, just because it feels heavy doesn't mean you can't lift it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I actually reasoned that when I was squatting, and it was a few weeks ago. I was getting back in my gear and starting to work, and I did a 520 squat. It was really good depth for me, and depth is a difficult thing for me because uh, refereeing is a human thing, and there's a certain amount of subjectivity to it. And I can't help but think that there's always one guy on one side of the judging in a squat that's red light Randy, that just red lights everybody regardless, but, and that's a pessimistic attitude. But depth for me is a little bit difficult. I'm a little bit older and I've had some injuries and things like that. And so, but that lift went really well. But it was one of those lifts that when I unracked it, I had a little bit trouble stepping it off. And I just listened. I just heard Dave Tate say in my head, just because it's heavy doesn't mean you can't lift it. And I thought, I'll give this a ride. And I did. So that's a weakness, for being a psychologist, particularly, working in sports psychology, which is part of what I do. It's really funny how it's kind of one of those physicians heal yourself sort of things, it's important that even if you have all the knowledge and everything like that, it's important to have a coach, training partner, or somebody else that knows how to work you.
What would you tell yourself if you started, if you could tell yourself something?
Oh, you know what? I'm one of those guys, as a young man, you couldn't tell me anything. When you were a sergeant, you had those guys on your crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like being a risk taker to some extent and things like that. There were things that I've done in the past powerlifting that did not lend itself to the longevity of the sport. And I hear a lot of older powerlifters now, guys like Greg Panora is talking about this a lot. If you want to be in the game a long time, you got to live smart. It's not just about effort. I think that's true. It's lifting, but in hindsight too, if I had all the knowledge when I started that I do now, yeah, I could have lifted smart, but I was in the same playing field that everybody else was that was waiting for Powerlifting USA to show up in the mailbox, right? It's just, what are you going to learn this month? How are you going to piece that together with what else you know? And then, yeah, and we all know in the fitness world, in bodybuilding, powerlifting, there's always these competing voices, right? Again, like I said, earlier, you've got people that are trying to sell something. They're coaching, their books, their whatever, and they're trying to use their niche, if you will. And what I found by doing a lot of YouTube watching and stuff like that, particularly with people when they start to critique each other, is that oftentimes the criticism doesn't have all the information.
Yeah. Well, what I say about the sport is with this, everyone lately, I find they'll say you have to squat this way, you have to have your legs out at this angle, you have to do this, you have to have the bar here, that's the right way to do it, this is the right way to, and I'm of the mindset, well, I've been around a lot of lifters, and everyone's different, and you can't say that everyone has to squat with the bar this low on your back. Some people, they just don't have that mobility. They can't. Their arms don't rotate back like that. They have an injury. This just. So that's.
I think this is the self-discovery part that I've been thinking about since you and I talked about, having this discussion. I was thinking, I can't tell you how many times over the last 20 years that I've been a powerlifter that my leverages have changed, which meant that my feet, as far as how they're angled out or how close together they are, my leverages have constantly changed. And ever since I dislocated my shoulder, I've had to move my bench press grip in. There are certainly things that you can do wrong, that you can just form wise or wrong,
Or if you look
and you
at
can get that.
basically all of it.
I think, and of course, it's like other things too, where you can get a certain amount of success throwing a ball wrong for a long time. Will you ever optimize your pitching if you throw it wrong? No, you won't. But I think that that's the thing of this powerlifting as a self-discovery. I think is so important. Is take it as a journey and not as a destiny, and start thinking about when your lifts start to stall or when you've had an injury or something. Okay, what am I going to do with what I'm doing to now work around that, right? Instead of think, and if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you'd be better off if you turned your toes out and stuff like that. Certainly, if it's at a meet, that's not the time to do it. But
Oh,
I think
that's when our first meet that we went to, right? I was 19, 20 years old. We were all pretty young. Our coach said, he was like, listen, we're going to get there. You're going to be warming up. People are going to come up to you and they're going to say, no, you need to change this. You need to change that. Maybe they're right. Maybe. But you trained for this meet the way you trained. Lift, do your meet. Don't change anything. After the meet, we can work on things.
no, I think that that's spot on. It's you don't try out new things on game day. I mean, and we're at our gym in 2 weeks. We're going to have a non-sanctioned in-house powerlifting meet, and the point of the meet is to work out some of those bugs that you can't do in a sanctioned meet, or you shouldn't do in a sanctioned meet. You can always try new stuff. I'll give you an example. When I was deadlifting in my last meet, I warmed up and everything with my new suit on, and the suit was feeling good and everything, but I'd never put my belt on the warm up. So I pulled a 500-pound deadlift without a belt on because I had my single ply suit on and I felt great and strong. I was pulling conventional. I went out for my first attempt and I couldn't get down to the bar. I mean, the suit and the belt together were so tight. So I got down the best that I could. I pulled on it and I tore my hands, and I had 2 attempts left, and now I've got a callus that's off. I hadn't pulled sumo in over 15 years in a competition, and when I pulled it in the gym, it was always with lightweight because I injured a pariformis, and that's what changed my squat or my deadlift from sumo to conventional.
You went,
you know what?
You went from sumo to conventional?
Yeah.
I never heard of anyone going out to in. It's always they start conventional and go out.
Tear a hip flexor or a piriformis and you just kind of go, oh my gosh. And see, where I got my hip problem was that sitting too much in a car at work, and then that getting out. You know how when you get out on work, you're always kind of dragging that leg. And I injured my right hip flexor, my right piriformis. So the only way that I could deadlift was conventional. And I got it up to where I was pulling a 600 with, so in that meet, I was hoping to pull 600. And that would be all-time PR for me. And gosh, that 550 tore my hands. I didn't even get the lift, didn't even finish it. So I was thinking, well, I've got a bench and I've got a squat on the thing. If I don't finish a deadlift, I'm going to bum out on the third lift, right? So I went out there and I put my feet back where I used to do it when I was sumo, and I reached down, I grabbed the bar, and I pulled 573, and it came up like nothing. And then I took a conservative third at 585 and got that one easily. And that was when I started going, I got to rethink this sumo thing. So again, you get this, sumo and conventional guys on the internet back and forth and stuff like that. And I'm like, what you need to do is you need to train so that when you get to a meet and something's not right, you can kind of adapt.
Yeah, I kind of have, I guess they call it like a modified conventional sumo. Like, like my toes aren't at the plates, like if my feet are out that wide, like I don't have the legs to get it up. It's not budging. And when I pull conventional, it looks awful, my back.
Yeah.
So like I've kind of found this like in between. I mean, it still doesn't look good, but it's the best.
When I ran the strength and fitness program for our fire department, every recruit academy that would come through, I would put them through a 14-week strength training program first thing of the day, and really modeled it after a guy that was the strength trainer for the Utah Jazz. And he had a company called Bigger, Faster, Stronger in Utah. And they had a program where you would do your first week, 3 sets of 3.
Yeah.
Your second week would be three sets of 5. Your third week would be a 5-3-1. And then your fourth week would be like a deload, and it would be 6, 8, 10, And the same with the lifts. You never taught anybody those extremes. We were teaching, get in a good jump stance, and that's your deadlift stance, right? The one that wherever your feet are. My sumo, what I call sumo, and it feels really wide to me, is really kind of my calves at the power rings.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, I realize that there's some women out there with some super mobility that can they're 5 feet tall and their feet are almost touching the plates, and they just, that amazes me. It's kind of like some of the real crazy arches you get on a bench press. Hey, they have that mobility. I don't got it,
Yeah, somehow like a lot of the girls, for whatever reason, they have that mobility in the arch in the bench. I just naturally have that arch. Like when I started day one, people were like, "Wow, that's like a really good arch." That's like my only good thing in power.
Well, and the thing is like what's happened for me. I always bench pressed with my feet out in front of me, wide, and knees at a greater than 90 degree. It stopped working for me, and I was popping my butt off the bench and stuff. And then I put my feet back, and I felt so much more stable with my toes behind me. And then even my coaches got me setting up a little bit different now, so that my arch is more stable and everything like that. But this goes back to this idea that you can't get into a fixed mindset of this is my way, right? Because as your leverages change and as your body changes, you have to say, well, what do I need to do now? Because what I used to do doesn't work for me anymore. What do I need to change?
Yeah. So you're very professional, because usually when anyone finds out that I got let go from the NYPD for a psychological reason, everyone wants to know what happened. Like they want to know the crazy story, right? And go ahead.
I'm an advocate for officers. I think that in fact, I just did a review of a journal article that was done on paramedics. And it'll be coming out. I recommended it for print, but they did a study on some paramedic students, right? And they started at the beginning of paramedic school, and then they retested for PTSD and some anxiety disorders and things like that. And I have my own viewpoint on psychometric instruments and diagnosis. But I'll tell you, and this is the second work that I've seen. Another one was out of Australia that was with firefighters. 6 months into paramedic school, after these guys have been doing clinicals, the majority of them were actually diagnosable with PTSD. And that's where, and I started looking. This is what I did in grad school. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It was a theory called the police officer's working personality.
No.
It was a guy, and I think it was 1970s. This guy had said, there is a certain personality. We don't know whether we hire these personalities or we create them with the culture, but there's a cop working personality. And I'm in my undergrad, and I'm writing papers on police psychology because that's where my interest was. And I started looking at his personality traits and comparing them to the diagnostic criteria of the DSM-4. And I'm like, with the exception of like some terminology differences, they're really describing the same thing. And so I started looking into that. Some of my professors that I had in grad school said, well, and some of the readings I had to do said, diagnostics is really so that professionals have a way of communicating. It's a taxonomy so that we can say, well, this person exhibits these kind of thinking patterns and stuff, so we'll call it this. But they said, it's really based on a medical metaphor that is not as literal as like when you need surgery. If you have your back out, there's a back injury, there's a physical thing, right? And
This,
psychiatry has been working a lot with neurotransmitters and things like that, but it all comes back to correlation, right? And you can't call a causation a correlation. So long story short, I just got to the point that I thought, when you start adapting to doing very, very dangerous work, whether it's combat work, police work, fire work, whatever, your personality does change, because you have to adapt to being able to go from being in your car with a cup of coffee to maybe jumping out and chasing somebody, or being in a fight within a few minutes. That does have an impact. And if everything else in our world that we engage in helps us to adapt and evolve, like powerlifting, if you keep picking up heavy things, you're just going to get bigger and stronger. A lot of the experts even say that, that for a new guy, any program works. It doesn't matter how you train, you're just going to get stronger. My attitude's the same thing about these kind of things. And I think the other side of it, and this is in some of the work that I did looking at fit for duty evaluations, is unfortunately fit for duty evaluation gets used sometimes by administrators to scapegoat and to get somebody out of the job that they don't want there. And if the psychologist doing that fit for duty evaluation works for the department or is in contract for the department's actually the client. And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
yeah. Well, like in my case, of course, everyone always wants to know, like, did something crazy happen?
Mm-hmm.
But I transferred from highway patrol to internal affairs after I was in there for 5 years, and I didn't have the motivation to take the lieutenant's test, because just like the sergeant's test, it's 6 months of studying, 6 months of like your life, and I just couldn't do it again. And if I went to internal affairs event, I'd become a sergeant, detective, you know what I mean? So you'd get a promotion. You'd get basically lieutenant's pay, but
Sure.
you'd still be a sergeant.
Okay.
So, but when you transfer, when you transfer, there's random drug tests anyway. But when you make a transfer like that, when you sign for the transfer, they drug test you. So I was like, okay, I put down all the stuff I was on. I was like, I didn't think it was gonna be a problem. I was like, as a good doctor was giving it to me, and they were like, they're like, we need your gun and your shield, and we need to talk to a psychiatrist. And he was like, oh yeah, we have him diagnosed with bipolar 1, but he's okay. He's like, I don't have a problem with him carrying a gun and a shield.
Well, I think that's the other side of it too, is that liability drives things that
cover
make it so. And this is a problem that we've had too with even active shooter situations. Is the first thing that happens in the media is, oh, this is psychological, and oh, it's a gun problem. So a lot of us that are working in psychology, the first thing we do is go, for crying out loud, if you had an active shooter that happened to be, let's say, on the spectrum of autism, or you had an active shooter that had, some other sort of thing, what it does is it stigmatizes everybody that's going to see somebody, right? So it's actually counterproductive. And like I said, it's not like you catch this cold. Absolutely most psychological disorders are manageable and treatable. And the unfortunate thing is that especially when it comes to law enforcement and the fact you carry a gun and everything, everybody wants some sort of guarantee that dog don't bite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate.
This is the unfortunate thing, right? Because, me and my wife were having issues. We went to marriage counseling, right? Went to therapist. therapist recommended I see a psychiatrist. I started seeing my own therapist and a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist put me on medication for like depression and stuff. And eventually they diagnosed me with bipolar. And so this went on for years while I was on the police department. And, I was, in my opinion, I was handling everything responsibly. You know?
Sure.
And so, anyway, so the end result is, right, they let me go. I mean, I had my pensions. I mean, like, which the whole thing was. I mean, in reality, like, I did 13 years and I got my pension. Would have gotten 20 years,
Mhm.
which is like, if you think of it, right, it's a good thing, right? Well, for a whole year, to me, I lost my identity.
Sure. Sure.
I was a mess,
Yeah.
because I was a. If you asked me who I was, I would say I'm a police officer.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
it would do is just like yoinks, like they just ripped it away from me.
Oh yeah.
And so
Well, and I think that that's why, honestly, I mean, I'm a cheater, I guess. That's why I've kind of stayed doing reserve work is, I mean, part of it too is that as a psychologist, particularly that does research on police officers and firefighters, it's good to stay in the business enough to be kind of still in touch. But I often wonder how much of that is just not being quite ready to let go of the identity yet, you know?
yeah, but now what it makes me feel bad for people is because a lot of people, they know my story, right? They know why I got let go and everything, and they tell me that like they want to see a therapist for depression and things like that, but they won't go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I read a book some time ago called "I Don't Want to Talk About It," and it's about male depression. And what was really interesting about it, I first saw the guy. His name is Terry Real, on a podcast, and talking about it. And it's really interesting because even in the diagnostic consistency, right? Men will often get diagnosed with PTSD, and women get diagnosed with depression, exhibiting very much the same thought patterns, the same behaviors. So there's also a gendered thing in there, that comes into play actually even in the diagnosis of different disorders. But I thought it was really interesting, and I don't know if you'd get anything out of reading the book. A lot of the book hit really close to home for me. Like, a lot of times men that are particularly in jobs like law enforcement stuff, when they feel depressed, have a tendency to act angry, not depressed. What people think that you're just going to be blue and sulking, right? If you're depressed, depression doesn't always look that way. The other thing too is that a lot of times people don't take into consideration the bigger picture of what's going on in life and what the circumstances are. I mean, if you feel stuck in a job, which I think a lot of police officers and firefighters can get into, I think now with more police officers are feeling this way than most firefighters really like it, but police officers feeling stuck because they've put so much into getting this skill set, and they put so much into the career. And like you say, if you're going to take a promotion test, I mean, even getting on the department is a year-long process. So getting promoted is a year-long process. You put that kind of thing in, and you're thinking, if I quit this job tomorrow, what am I going to go do that's going to pay me the same?
Nothing.
Just nothing. There's nothing. So if you feel stuck, from an existential psychology point of view, you're like in prison, right? It doesn't matter if you're out and about in the world. And I think really instructive to me in the pandemic has been, I started watching Josh Bryant, and I started reading his books on Jailhouse Strong. And what those guys that he interviewed and the things that went into his book described a lot of the same thing. They're saying, you know what, it doesn't matter if you're on the outside or you're on the inside. If you're stuck in life, you're basically in prison and having to deal with the same kind of mentality of being there. And that's a challenge. It's a huge challenge.
You know what? I want to hit one more point with you with cops.
Okay.
I find this interesting with police officers, right? Like, so I go to, I mean, this happens everywhere. Well, let's just uh, this recently, I go to a group called Celebrate Recovery.
Hmm.
It's like, basically it's like a 12-step Christian group, and there's maybe 20 guys that come, and four of us all started just talking to each other. This group of four people, just tight, and just the four of us. None of us told each other we were police officers, and it just so happened that all four added up. No one else in the group was a police officer, but the four of us, we all, oh, you're a cop. Oh, you were a cop. You're a cop. You're a cop.
Yeah.
And I always find that you could be on a cruise ship, and somehow that other cop on that cruise ship, you'll wind up like, I don't know what it is, but we wind up finding each other.
I think that that's what makes Dan Grossman, Lieutenant Grossman's metaphor of the sheepdog so powerful for officers of, because you do go, I do feel different. And I know that the way that I move, I know the way that I talk, even the way that I socialize becomes different because you work with the public. And I don't think, when I was a field training officer, I used to teach my new guys this. I said, you're going to go to so many different scenarios every day that need to have a different kind of police officer there, right? You can't be the same cop at every scene because it doesn't fit. So you have to learn to be a little bit flexible with the way that you socialize with people and talk to them and the way that you work things out. Sometimes you have to be that kind of tough authority figure that tells a young teenager, and holds the boundaries. And then other times you have to be compassionate. That's one thing I think right now in the popular media that is not being seen is you really have to show up and assess what the situation is and then hook into that situation. I think when you do that for a really long time and you get days off and you're in your soft clothes and stuff like that, number one, that's hard to turn all that off. But the number two thing is that you find you don't really want to socialize that much with civilians because the first thing out of their mouth is the last ticket they got, right? And how unfair it was. And you're kind of like, I really don't want to hear about your traffic history, but it's people trying to connect and make some sort of a thing, but it really, they don't see it from our point of view as kind of like it's a real turnoff. So I think that that's one of the things is that you do kind of pick up on kind of a kindred spirit. And, it's happened to me. It's happened to me in the airport, sitting on a corner of a bar and just chat with the guy and all of a sudden find out he's a detective somewhere. And you're just like, oh, wow, So yeah, it's there. I think it's an embodied thing. I think this is why we get into that's my identity. I think it does become an identity. And I remember having one of the guys that started our post program come in when we were in our orientation. He said, I was a cop for 5 years. That was all I did. But he goes, once you're a cop, you're always a cop and it never changes. You just kind of, you become that. And I think that that's an interesting thing, still curious about that.
Yeah. Well, this is a wild podcast because this turned out to be nothing. Well, so we talked about powerlifting, but you're a police officer. We really got into some cool stuff, and I had a good time. Do you have?
Me too.
Do you have any books that you've published or any articles?
I was a co-editor on a book that's called Humanistic Contributions to Psychology 101. And it's really meant to be a supplement to a Psychology 101 book. So it's written for like the college freshman. Yeah. It kind of gives a humanistic existential perspective of psychology. It's not mainstream psychology, but it's in language that is, really accessible, especially for today's millennial. Most of my other writings I've done has either been in collaboration. I did a chapter with my colleague, Dr. Eric Russell, who is a retired Air Force firefighter, and he wrote a book called In Command of Guardians. It's a servant leadership book for police and fire. And I did a lot of contributions to that. Most of my publications are journal articles, stuff like that.
And What's your Instagram name so people know?
It's just my first and last name. If you put those together with no space and an at in front of it, that's how you find me.
Just let people know.
I do. I'm pretty. I'm a little bit looser with my Instagram than I am my Facebook. I really have my Instagram is really narrow to physical culture. People that are into lifting. One thing, you asked me is if I could go back and I could give myself advice. I would have started practicing yoga a lot younger too.
Hard yoga. You think it's easy? It's not. It's brutal.
And it's really hard at 250 pounds. So, but so necessary. There's so many things in there, both spiritually and physically, to grow from. I probably would have gotten into that a little bit earlier, but I do recommend that. And I saw that Colorado Springs had a Facebook post the other day where their post class has a yoga class as part of their PT, and I thought, wow, that's pretty progressive. So I would do that because I think that lends to mobility, and it also lends to a little bit of coordination mastery and balance and things like that. That's really important. It's interesting, kind of going back to the self-discovery idea. It's interesting how the more flexible and strong you are physically, you have a tendency to be more flexible and strong mentally too. There's a real strong correlation between how we are mentally and physically.
Yeah. If it wasn't for lifting, like the mental, like just toughness that it's taught me. First of all, there's no way I'd still be married to my wife. There's I would have never went to to therapy to get help. I would just my life would be just a total wreck if it wasn't. I know for a fact, it's not like I'm not like a perfect guy here. Like but I would have been so off the rails. It would have, it would have been a total disaster.
Yeah, and it's good, and it's really important to have a good partnership that way. And I think that couples that play together, you have a lot more fuller life if you're doing at least participating in each other's interests. If you're really not completely dialed in on one or two things, but to participate and understand about them, that's an important step.
Yeah,
I think.
follow my wife at JM Naziri on Instagram. She's really great. She's way better lifter than me, like 10 times better.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
No, I'm really excited. I think that's one of the things in powerlifting that's just really amazing is the women that are showing up at the meets are doing some amazing things. And when you look at what has happened at Westside and their women, all of them say that on the Westside movie that the women actually really had always been amazing there and just hadn't got the same press, but yeah, there's a lot of lifters nowadays that are really amazing. Couple of them that I watch on Instagram, I think I could actually work out with her because we wouldn't have to change our weights much. And, I outweigh them by so much. It's kind of embarrassing, but cool for them, right? It's awesome.
My first day in the gym in St. Francis College, they had me squatting. The coach was like, "Yeah, go squat with the girls because you can't lift anything." I squatted. I think it was like 95 pounds. I think was my first day in the gym.
Wow. Yeah, and that's one of the big things too with people starting out is everybody starts somewhere, but we're all made out of the same material. We can all adapt. It's just a matter of just training and hanging in there and sticking with it. And not once you get past those new guy gains, now it's time to put the work in. It's difficult, but it's fun. It's a lifestyle. I really like it, and I think it does lend itself. One thing I did learn from Mike Israetel's book is that if you use lifting for mental health, you have to really moderate, not overdoing it, because there's some days when I should take a rest day where emotionally I want to go to the gym because I've got some stuff I want to work out, and I really have to say, find something else to do today. Your body needs the rest. And for a lot of years, I didn't do that. And I think that lent itself to some injuries and some things that I did wrong.
Yeah. Well, this was a really good podcast. I had a really great time.
Hey, I did too. I'm glad we did it. And, maybe we'll do it again, huh?
Yeah, man. I really like this podcasting thing. I made so many friends. I keep making new friends. It's a lot of fun.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, and I learn new things, make new friends. It's really great.
Yeah.
And, so this was really great. I'll stay in touch with you and have a good night.
Very cool. Take care.
Bye.
See ya.